Mrs. Hughes because she's so nice and she helps us. I love Mrs. Hughes because she is the kindest teacher ever. I like Mrs. Hughes because she sometimes lets us do things that we usually can't do. I love Mrs. Hughes because she's kind and she helps me with my math. I like my teacher because she helps me with my reading and writing. I love Mrs. Hughes because she's nice, she cares for people, and she helps people. Thank you, Mrs. Hughes, for teaching us. She's a good teacher and she's so nice to me. I love Mrs. Hughes because she helps us learn math and reading. I love you, Mrs. Hughes, because you are nice and you help me when I need help. I love you, Mrs. Hughes, because you're funny and you are the best teacher. I love you, Mrs. Hughes, because you are so kind and you are great at teaching us math. She lets us do Fun Friday and play on our iPads. I love you, Mrs. Hughes, because you are nice to me and you are great at math. You are silly sometimes. I think Mrs. Hughes is so nice and I love her so much. Hi, Mrs. Hughes, I love you and thank you for helping me out with math. We love to have you as our teacher. He lets us do all that stuff and we love her. I love Mrs. Hughes and she's really nice.
Thank you, Mrs. Hughes, for being a great teacher and helping me out with my homework.
She makes me laugh and she's so kind. I love Mrs. Hughes because she is the best teacher. She is the best teacher ever. She is really kind. She is funny, and she is the best teacher I've had in all the years. She lets people come and let people have fun. And she let a dog come that was a therapy dog. Thank you, Mrs. Hughes, for being a good teacher. And I'm glad that I was in your class this year. I love you, Mrs. Hughes, because you're nice and sweet and do a lot of nice things for us. And that's why we love her. I love you, Mrs. Hughes. Thank you, Mrs. Hughes. I love you, Mrs. Hughes. Thank you, Mrs. Hughes. I love you, Mrs. Hughes. Love you, Mrs. Hughes. Thank you, Mrs. Hughes. I love you, Mrs. Hughes. I love you, Mrs. Hughes. Thank you, Mrs. Hughes. I love you, Mrs. Hughes. I love you, Mrs. Hughes.